The palace had stood for centuries without flinching. Wars had thundered beyond its gates. Scandals had flickered through its corridors. Governments had risen and fallen beneath the weight of its shadow. And yet, on this night, the tremor did not come from outside. It came from within. Just after dusk, in a sealed security room deep inside Kensington Palace, a single screen began to replay a moment no one was meant to question. The footage was grainy, silent, almost ordinary. A corridor, a child, a figure approaching. But in institutions built on ritual and hierarchy, almost is never harmless. A senior protection officer requested an unscheduled audience. No aides, no advisors, only urgency. When Prince William entered the room, he expected routine confirmation. Instead, he was handed something far heavier than intelligence. He was handed a decision. On the screen stood Princess Charlotte, alone, and walking toward her, with clearance that bypassed standard child protection protocol, was Queen Camilla. Nothing dramatic, no raised voices, no visible threat, just a boundary crossed. And sometimes in royal history, a single silent minute can carry more consequence than a public scandal. The silence from that screen did not fade when the footage ended. It lingered inside the secure briefing room of Kensington Palace. The air felt altered, as though the centuries-old walls themselves had absorbed what had just been witnessed. The corridor on the screen was empty now, frozen, harmless again. But moments earlier, it had not been. Prince William remained standing, hands resting lightly against a polished oak table. His posture was composed, military straight, measured. Yet something in his stillness carried gravity beyond protocol. On the table before him, the final frame showed Princess Charlotte mid-turn. Small, composed, alone longer than she should ever have been. The senior royal protection officer cleared his throat quietly. Your Royal Highness, the timestamps have been verified. Entry logs confirm clearance was manually entered at 1942 hours. William did not immediately respond. He replayed the sequence again. Charlotte entering the corridor, the empty stretch of carpet, then the appearance of Queen Camilla. There had been no visible confrontation, no raised hand, no audible reprimand. The footage was subtle, almost disappointingly so. And yet something in it unsettled him, not because it was dramatic, but because it was deliberate. Within royal residences, there exist layers of invisible architecture, traditions that are not written in constitutional text but are obeyed as fiercely as law. A child in direct succession is never left unaccompanied in transitional space. Rotations are seamless. Guards overlap. Nannies shadow quietly but constantly. This corridor had been cleared. William finally spoke, explained the override. The officer shifted his weight slightly, the only indication of strain. A senior-level code temporarily reassigned corridor E17 coverage for 6 minutes, sir. The guard stationed near the E stairwell was instructed to stand down. By whom? A pause that lasted half a heartbeat too long. The clearance originated from the Queen Consort's access authorization. The room did not react, but history did. William leaned closer to the screen. He magnified the image, Camilla lowering herself to Charlotte's height, a gloved hand resting briefly on a small shoulder. Charlotte's chin dipped, a subtle shift, a child instinctively retreating inward. It lasted less than a second, but William saw it. Fathers see what cameras cannot. What of the audio, he asked. Partial capture only. Corridor microphones are low sensitivity. For privacy. The officer activated a filtered playback. Faint distortion. Fabric movement. A few indistinct syllables. Nothing incriminating. Nothing overt. But not nothing. William exhaled slowly. Beyond the walls of the security wing, palace life continued with disciplined calm. Silver trays moved down service corridors. Staff conducted evening briefings in hushed tones. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock marked the hour. The monarchy appeared intact. Yet here, in this sealed room, something foundational had shifted. Because this was not about scandal. It was about boundaries. William straightened. Who else has reviewed this footage? Only Senior Protection Command. Sir, it has not been circulated. Seal it under Level 7 classification. Yes, sir. The officer hesitated again. There is an additional irregularity. He pulled up another data screen. Lines of digital logs scrolled in order precision. Badge scans, security confirmations, corridor clearances. One segment blinked. 1945 to 1946:30. Video continuity registers a 90-second compression anomaly. The officer said carefully, "The file does not appear corrupted. It appears edited." William's gaze hardened. Edited by whom? We are still tracing that, sir. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This was no longer an isolated override. This suggested intention. William turned away from the screen and walked toward the tall window overlooking the inner courtyard. Night had settled fully across London. The lights beyond the palace gates glimmered distant and unaware. He thought briefly, unwillingly, of legacy, of his father, King Charles III, who had inherited a crown shaped by endurance, of the institution's instinct to protect itself first. But William's thoughts did not linger on optics. They returned to Charlotte. Earlier that evening, she had been quieter at supper, her laughter subdued. When asked about her afternoon, she had offered polite brevity, unusual for her age. Children rarely articulate discomfort. They absorb it. He felt it now, that subtle paternal alarm that precedes reason. Behind him, the officer waited for instruction. William's voice, when it came, was calm. Prepare a provisional residential separation directive. The officer blinked once. Sir, pending full internal review, the Queen Consort is to be removed from adjacency to my children's private quarters. The words settled heavily. This was not public censure, not accusation, but within royal structure, proximity is power. To suspend it, even temporarily, was unprecedented. Effective immediately, William added. Yes, sir. Encrypted notifications began moving through internal channels within minutes. Quiet, professional, devoid of emotion. Schedules adjusted. Access hierarchies updated. Guard rotations recalibrated. No announcement would be made. The Crown does not dramatize internal correction. It corrects and continues. Meanwhile, in a softly lit nursery wing, Princess Charlotte sat cross-legged on a pale rug, a storybook open but untouched in her lap. A nanny spoke gently beside her, voice warm, unaware of the institutional tremor unfolding only corridors away. Charlotte nodded politely, but her eyes seemed distant. William watched her briefly from the doorway later that night. He did not mention corridors, or footage, or protocol. He simply knelt. Everything all right, darling? She hesitated, then nodded. Children of royalty learn composure early. William kissed her forehead. As he stood again, his resolve crystallized. This was not rebellion. This was guardianship. Back in security wing, technicians began combing through mirrored servers, searching for the missing 90 seconds. Every keystroke echoed faintly in the dim room. Screens flickered with forensic detail. The officer overseeing the recovery understood the gravity. Royal crises rarely begin with explosions. They begin with small permissions, small silences, small erasures. Near midnight, preliminary findings surfaced. The compression anomaly was not random. It originated from an internal administrative terminal, one accessible only through high-level authentication. Someone with authority had refined the record. William received the update in silence. He did not rage. He did not accuse. He understood something more dangerous than confrontation was unfolding. Loyalty fractures rarely announce themselves loudly. They whisper, and when they whisper inside palaces, the echoes can carry across generations. Hours later, as the palace dimmed into ceremonial stillness, William remained awake in his private study. Papers lay untouched on his desk. A single lamp cast amber light against dark wood paneling. He thought of history, of corridors walked by monarchs who chose silence when speech was inconvenient. He would not be one of them. This was not about hierarchy. It was about trust. And trust, once compromised in matters of children, cannot be negotiated. Before dawn, formal documentation was drafted, language precise, grounded in procedural concern. No emotion, no inference, Temporary withdrawal of residential proximity, pending sovereign review. The phrasing was clinical. The implication was not. When the notice reached Camilla's private secretary at first light, it was received with dignified stillness. No raised voices. No visible protest. But within the unseen architecture of the monarchy, a boundary had been drawn. And boundaries, once drawn by a future king, are rarely erased. As morning broke over Kensington Palace, sunlight returned to the courtyard as though nothing had shifted. Guards resumed their posts. Visitors gathered at the gates. Photographers scanned windows for glimpses of routine. The world saw stability. But inside the palace, something had changed. William stood once more at the window overlooking the gardens. He understood the risk. Any escalation could ripple toward constitutional sensitivity, toward the sovereign himself, toward perception of unity within the House of Windsor. Yet leadership is not measured in comfort. It is measured in the moments one refuses to ignore. Behind him, a secure phone vibrated softly. Another update from archive analysis. The missing 90 seconds were not erased. They were relocated, hidden within a secondary server cluster, labeled under routine maintenance logs. William closed his eyes briefly. This was intentional. And intentional actions demand intentional response. He turned back to the room. Continue retrieval, he instructed. Yes, sir. Outside, the bells of London rang out across the waking city. Inside, a future king prepared to confront something far more delicate than scandal. He prepared to confront a fracture within the crown itself. Because sometimes the greatest threat to an institution is not public opposition. It is quiet assumption, quiet access, quiet overreach. And what those missing 90 seconds contained might redefine everything. The order had been given, but orders within royal walls are only the beginning. By morning, the private security wing beneath Kensington Palace felt less like a residence and more like a command center. Lights remained dim, deliberately so. Screens glowed against shadowed walls. No one spoke above what was necessary. The missing 90 seconds were no longer rumor. They were priority. A small team of digital forensic specialists, drawn from the Metropolitan Royal Protection Command, worked in disciplined silence. Every keystroke was logged, every access point mirrored. Within institutions built on heritage, even internal investigations observe ritual. Prince William did not hover. He observed. Standing behind the analysts, he watched the reconstruction of the timeline unfold across multiple monitors. Rebuild from primary feed, he instructed. Yes, sir. The corridor returned to life. Princess Charlotte entering frame. Timestamp. 19 hours, 42 minutes, and 11 seconds. Her assigned nanny exiting an adjacent doorway moments earlier, cross-referenced and verified. A guard rotation flagged as routine. Then, at 19 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds, the first irregularity. A clearance input. Manual. Origin terminal. East Administrative Console 3. William's gaze sharpened. Who was logged onto Console 3? Tracing authentication now, sir. The system responded with a biometric confirmation. Authorization. Queen Consort. Name displayed formally. Queen Camilla. No delegation. No intermediary. Direct. William said nothing. The footage continued. Charlotte alone. 47 seconds. 1 minute, 18 seconds. 2 minutes. In Royal Child Protection Protocol, 2 minutes is not a gap. It is an eternity. Then Camilla entered frame. Calm, measured. Her posture carried the authority of someone accustomed to unchallenged access. She approached without haste, gloved hands clasped loosely. Zoom and stabilize, William said quietly. The analyst complied. Charlotte's body language became clearer. A small shift of weight from one foot to the other. A brief glance toward the corridor's far end, toward where a guard should have been visible. But he was not. Where was the posted officer during this interval? William asked. A secondary screen displayed guard positioning logs. Reassigned to stairwell security for 6 minutes under senior clearance. An analyst replied. Was there a threat requiring reassignment? No, sir. William absorbed that. This was not reactive security. It was selective absence. The footage rolled forward. Camilla bent slightly, lowering herself to Charlotte's eye level. The corridor microphones, designed for ambience rather than surveillance, captured faint distortion. Analysts enhanced the waveform carefully, conscious of both legality and restraint. A fragment of sound emerged. Must understand static. Important than nothing, not accusation, not reprimand, but conversation, intentional and unrecorded in full. At 19 hours 45 minutes and 12 seconds, the compression anomaly began. The screen flickered once. Time skipped forward exactly 90 seconds. The reconstruction software flagged the splice point with clinical precision. Extract from mirrored backup, William ordered. The lead technician hesitated only to confirm encryption layers. Secondary node retrieval initiated. The room fell silent except for the hum of processors. In another wing of the palace, morning tea was being served. Courtiers reviewed schedules. Staff moved with the choreography of continuity. No one beyond this room knew that institutional gravity was bending. Minutes passed. Then, recovered segment located. Every eye fixed on the central screen. The recovered footage loaded slowly, corrupted edges stabilizing as data reassembled. The corridor reappeared. Camilla and Charlotte still in frame, but the posture had changed. Camilla's hand now rested lightly but firmly on Charlotte's shoulder. Charlotte's chin was lowered, not in fear, not overtly distressed, but subdued. The audio, though faint, carried a clearer phrase this time after enhancement. You mustn't speak of every conversation. The room stilled. William's expression did not explode into anger. It tightened into something colder. Play that again. The phrase repeated. Soft, measured, not shouted, but instructive. Charlotte shifted slightly under the touch. Was there any follow-up communication from the Queen Consort's office regarding this interaction? William asked. A communications analyst checked internal logs. None recorded, sir. The footage continued. Camilla withdrew her hand. Charlotte nodded once. Then Camilla stepped back, smoothing her coat. The 90 seconds ended with Camilla exiting frame first. Charlotte remained alone for 6 more seconds before her nanny hurried into view. The video ended. Silence. This was not scandal. It was subtlety. And subtlety within the monarchy can be more consequential than spectacle. William stepped forward. Cross-reference with historical child guardian protocol, he said. An archivist access precedent files. Royal residences have long operated under unwritten rules, reinforced after past institutional failures. Direct conversations with heirs or those in succession, without primary guardians or approved aides present, are discouraged. Not illegal, but discouraged. Not because conversation is forbidden, but because influence, however gentle, carries weight. Has this protocol ever been formally breached? William asked. Only during documented ceremonial instructions, sir. This was not ceremonial. No, sir. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating quietly beneath the palace's polished floors. A junior officer, tasked with validating guard reassignment logs, discovered something additional. The stand-down order issued to the corridor guard carried not only Camilla's clearance, but an internal note. Direct senior clearance. No interference required. Senior clearance under whose review? William asked. Authority trace suggests confirmation to the household coordination desk. Who was duty coordinator that evening? A name appeared. A long-serving palace official known for discretion. William's gaze lingered on it. Institutional fractures rarely occur through singular action. They require quiet compliance. Hours later, in a private study, William reviewed printed still frames alone. The paper felt heavier than its weight suggested. He did not see villainy. He saw overreach. And perhaps something more dangerous. Assumption. Assumption that proximity to authority grants freedom from scrutiny. His thoughts drifted briefly to his father, King Charles III. Informing the sovereign would escalate the matter beyond household management into constitutional sensitivity. But withholding would erode trust further. The monarchy rests not only on bloodline, but on clarity of boundary. A knock interrupted his reflection. The senior protection officer entered. Sir, one additional detail. William gestured for him to continue. The archive logs show the 90-second relocation occurred 14 minutes after initial recording. It was not an automated overwrite. It was manually initiated. From where? From the Queen Consort's private administrative suite. The implication landed without theatrics. William stood slowly. Has the Queen Consort been informed of the provisional proximity suspension? Yes, sir. Delivered respectfully at 9:20 hours. And her response? Dignified acknowledgement. No objection stated. Of course, royal discipline is rarely loud, but silence can be strategic. William moved toward the window once more. Outside, London continued unaware. Tourists gathered. Traffic hummed beyond palace gates. History often unfolds in rooms the public never sees. Behind him, the officer waited. Begin formal documentation. William said at last. Full timeline. Guard rotations. Clearance authorizations. Audio enhancement transcripts. Yes, sir. And ensure the recovered 90 seconds are duplicated under sovereign seal. A beat. Understood. As the day lengthened, analysts completed their reconstruction. The narrative was clear. Charlotte had been intentionally left unaccompanied. A guard had been reassigned without threat. Camilla had approached under pre-cleared access. A private conversation had occurred, and 90 seconds of that interaction had been manually relocated. Nothing overtly criminal, nothing publicly explosive, but constitutionally delicate. By late afternoon, William requested a private meeting. Location, drawing room 3. Attendees himself, the Queen Consort. No aides, no witnesses. The summons was formal, measured, respectful, but unmistakable. Meanwhile, in the nursery wing, Charlotte resumed her routine. Lessons continued. Play resumed. Her laughter returned in cautious increments. Children adapt quickly, but fathers remember. As the hour approached, the palace seemed to inhale. Staff sensed tension, though no announcement was made. Footsteps softened in corridors. Conversations lowered, because when bloodline confronts hierarchy, even walls listen. William entered drawing room 3 first. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating portraits of monarchs past. Silent observers of generational reckoning. Moments later, Camilla entered, composed, unhurried. Their eyes met. No hostility, only awareness. William gestured politely toward a chair. She remained standing. Your Royal Highness, she began smoothly, I understand their concerns. William did not respond immediately. He placed a single still frame on the table between them. Charlotte, alone in corridor. Then another, Camilla's hand on her shoulder. And finally, a transcript excerpt. You mustn't speak of every conversation. The room grew very still. Outside, a distant clock chimed the hour. William's voice was calm. I am not interested in interpretation. I am interested in protocol. Camilla's expression remained steady, and protocol was observed. Charlotte was alone. For less than 3 minutes. She is a child. She is also a princess. The distinction lingered. This was the quiet battlefield. Blood versus structure. William stepped closer. 90 seconds were relocated. Camilla's gaze did not waver. Conversations with minors deserve privacy. Not when clearance systems are manipulated. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed her expression. Not guilt, recognition. The monarchy had entered new terrain. Because this was not about scandal. It was about accountability within walls historically insulated from it. William's next words carried generational weight. Until review concludes, proximity remains suspended. Camilla held his gaze. You are prepared for what this implies? I am prepared to protect my daughter. Silence settled between them. Not explosive, but transformative. Camilla inclined her head slightly. Very well. No argument. No raised voice. But something fundamental had shifted. The meeting ended without ceremony. As Camilla departed the drawing room, courtiers avoided direct eye contact, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Institutions sensed recalibration. William remained alone for several moments afterward. He understood escalation, now loomed inevitable. Because 90 seconds had revealed more than a phrase. They had revealed assumption of authority unchecked. And unchecked authority within monarchy carries echoes. By evening, a junior officer reviewing tertiary backups made one final discovery. Embedded metadata within the relocated segment indicated an additional access attempt. Unsuccessful. Someone else had tried to view the 90 seconds before relocation. The username was unfamiliar. Internal, but not household staff. William received the update in silence. This was widening. What began as a corridor anomaly was becoming something layered. Influence, access, possibly divided loyalty. Outside, dusk returned to Kensington Palace. The same violet sky as the night before. The palace stood unchanged to the public eye, but within its secured archives, truth had resurfaced, and truth, once recovered, cannot easily be resealed. William looked once more at the still frame of Charlotte in the corridor. Small, composed, trusting. He folded the page carefully, because this investigation was no longer solely about 90 seconds. It was about who believed they could rewrite them. The palace felt composed on the surface, but beneath its carved ceilings and ancestral portraits, something had shifted. The discovery of the additional access attempt, log minutes before the 90-second relocation, lingered like an unspoken accusation. It suggested that someone else, somewhere within the institution, had known the footage mattered and had tried to reach it. Inside drawing room 3, the air still carried the residue of William's earlier meeting. Sunlight had long faded, replaced by the muted glow of evening lamps. The room's walls, lined with portraits of monarchs past, seemed less decorative now, more watchful. Prince William stood alone for several moments before the door opened once more. Queen Camilla entered with the composure of someone who understood both symbolism and timing. Her steps were measured, her expression calm. There would be no raised voices tonight, only gravity. William did not sit. "Thank you for turning," he said evenly. Camilla inclined her head. "I assumed this conversation was not finished." "It is not." Between them, on a polished table, lay a slim leather folder. Inside, transcripts, access logs, still frames. Not accusations, documentation. William opened it slowly. There was a second access attempt on the relocated segment. He began, "Unsuccessful. Log from an internal terminal not assigned to your office." Camilla's gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. "That suggests your concern extends beyond me." "It suggests," William replied, "that the matter may involve others who believe the footage required management." Silence stretched between them. This was no longer simply about a corridor conversation. It was about influence within the system, about who felt empowered to adjust record. Camilla moved toward the window, hands clasped lightly before her. "You are aware," she said softly, "that institutions survive through discretion, and they erode through secrecy." William answered. Her reflection in the glass met his eyes indirectly. "You are young enough to believe transparency alone sustains legitimacy." "And I am old enough," William replied, "to understand the cost of silence." The room tightened. The missing 90 seconds lay between them like a quiet witness. William continued, voice steady. "You approached Charlotte without her assigned guardian present. I sought a private word. You reassigned her corridor guard for privacy. You relocated footage for dignity, and you instructed her not to speak of every conversation." Camilla turned from the window. "You imply coercion. I imply boundary." The word settled heavily. In royal architecture, bloodline defines succession, but boundaries define survival. Camilla stepped closer. "Charlotte is not only your daughter," she said carefully. "She is a future asset of the crown. There will be expectations placed upon her." "She is 8, William replied. "She is a princess." There was again the distinction. William's jaw tightened slightly. "And I am her father." The statement was quiet, absolute. For a moment, neither spoke. The portraits on the wall, kings, queens, consorts, seemed to lean inward, history listening. William reached into the folder and removed the enhanced transcript excerpt. "You mustn't speak of every conversation." He placed it gently on the table. "Explain that." Camilla did not flinch. Children often repeat conversations without context. It can cause unnecessary speculation. Speculation within whose mind? She did not answer immediately. William stepped closer. The guard station near the east stairwell was instructed to stand down under direct senior clearance. That clearance was validated through household coordination. Camilla's composure thinned slightly. Are you suggesting conspiracy? I am suggesting alignment. He paused. Someone anticipated scrutiny. The words did not accuse. They observed. Meanwhile, in the nursery wing, Princess Charlotte sat with her tutor, quietly tracing calligraphy across thick parchment paper. Her concentration was intact, her posture composed. But when footsteps echoed in nearby corridors, her gaze lifted reflexively. Small signs. Father's notice. Back in drawing room 3, tension deepened, not through volume, but through restraint. You seek to escalate this, Camilla said softly. I seek clarity. And if clarity destabilizes perception? William's expression did not soften. Then perception must adapt. The line was drawn not through anger, but through philosophy. Camilla exhaled slowly. You believe this is about influence. I believe, William replied, that private counsel to a child of succession, conducted without guardians present and then selectively archived, violates established precedent. Camilla's voice cooled. Precedent evolves. Not without consensus. The air seemed heavier now. William closed a folder deliberately. This matter will be formally reviewed. You involved a sovereign? There it was, the unspoken boundary. To escalate to King Charles III was to shift the issue from household discretion to constitutional gravity. William held her gaze. If necessary. Silence. Camilla studied him carefully. You are prepared for the optics of challenging a reigning queen consort. I am prepared, William replied, to protect the integrity of guardianship. Not defiance. Not rebellion. Guardianship. Camilla's shoulders squared subtly. And what of unity? Unity built on silence fractures. The room stilled again. Somewhere deep within the palace, a clock marked the hour. The confrontation did not erupt. It crystallized. Camilla's final words were measured. Be certain, William, that the line you draw today does not isolate you tomorrow. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the table and rested his hand lightly against the leather folder. Lines are not drawn to isolate, he said quietly. They are drawn to protect. Camilla regarded him for a long moment, then inclined her head. Very well. She exited without further remark. The door closed softly. William remained still. He understood the implications. To escalate formally would ripple across advisory circles, across Commonwealth perception, across internal loyalty structures. But he also understood something more elemental. Charlotte had changed, not dramatically, but subtly. Her laughter measured, her answers brief, her gaze occasionally distant. Later that evening, William visited her once more. He found her sitting beside a window, watching the fading light. Thinking hard? He asked gently. She nodded. About what? She hesitated. Then, about what I'm allowed to say. The words were simple, but they landed with quiet force. William knelt beside her. You're always allowed to speak to me. She studied his face, searching. Even if it's important? Especially then. Charlotte seemed to consider that. Then she leaned against him, small and warm and utterly human beneath titles. In that moment, the institution receded. There was only father and daughter. But beyond that door, the monarchy recalibrated, because news of the provisional proximity suspension had circulated quietly among senior staff. Courtiers whispered in measured tones. Some viewed William's actions as protective, others as destabilizing. Loyalty lines are rarely visible, but they exist. Late that night, the junior officer who had identified the secondary access attempt returned with additional findings. The unfamiliar username was traced. It belonged to a mid-level administrative official, one whose role interfaced frequently with both the Queen Consort's office and Central Security Archives. Access attempt timestamp, 1948. Exactly 3 minutes after the relocation. Has this individual been interviewed? William asked. Not yet, sir. Arrange it. Yes, sir. The web widened. This was no longer a singular moment in a corridor. It was a pattern, a coordinated instinct to contain. And containment implies fear. William returned to his study. He sat alone for several minutes, considering the path ahead. Escalation meant confrontation beyond Camilla. It meant addressing structural culture, and possibly challenging assumptions that had existed long before he assumed greater responsibility. The weight was immense, but so was clarity. The next morning, a confidential memorandum was drafted requesting sovereign review. Not accusatory, but procedural. Language careful. Grounded in child protection protocol. Neutral in tone. Firm in implication. The envelope was sealed under classification. Before dispatch, William paused. He knew this act would redefine internal dynamics. He also knew inaction would redefine him. He signed. Meanwhile, palace staff felt the tremor. A generational shift, subtle but unmistakable. Not loud, but resolute. Because when bloodline confronts hierarchy, the outcome shapes legacy. And somewhere within the digital archive, the 90 seconds remain duplicated under sovereign seal. Intact, irreversible. As dusk settled again over Kensington Palace, William stood at the same window he had occupied 2 nights earlier. The gardens below were quiet, stable. To the public eye, nothing had changed. But inside these walls, boundaries had been named. And once named, they cannot easily be ignored. The memorandum had left his desk before dawn. It traveled not through ceremony, but through discretion, hand-delivered under seal classification to the private office of King Charles III. And then the palace grew quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of routine, but the waiting quiet. Within the carved stone corridors of Kensington Palace, staff moved with heightened awareness. Conversations shortened when footsteps approached. Doors closed more softly than usual. The matter had not gone public. It had gone upward, and upward, in a monarchy, carries a different gravity. Prince William stood in his private study, reading the duplicate transcript once more. The enhanced audio line, "You mustn't speak of every conversation," no longer shocked him. It unsettled him, because its tone was not harsh. It was measured, which meant it had been intentional. Outside, London continued without pause. Traffic pulsed beyond palace gates. Tourists gathered with cameras, hoping for glimpses of routine. But inside, an ancient institution confronted something more fragile than scandal. It confronted silence. Hours passed before a response came. Not a summons. Not yet. A request for documentation. Comprehensive timeline. Guard rotation logs. Clearance authorizations, audio enhancement verification, and precedent citations regarding minor guardian protocol. The sovereign was not reacting emotionally. He was reviewing structurally. William respected that. He ensured every file was immaculate, every timestamp cross-verified, every phrase contextualized. This was not about accusation. It was about constitutional spirit. Because while the monarchy functions through symbolism, it survives through process. Late afternoon brought a quiet meeting of senior palace courtiers in a wood-paneled chamber seldom photographed. No press secretary attended. No aides beyond those required for documentation. At the head of the table sat the king. William entered with measured composure. Moments later, Queen Camilla joined them. The air shifted. This was no longer a private disagreement. It was institutional reckoning. King Charles regarded the documents before him carefully. His expression was neither anger nor defense. It was contemplation. "You are certain," he said to William, voice calm but deliberate, "that protocol was bypassed?" "Yes, sir." "And that footage was manually relocated?" "Yes, sir." The king turned slightly toward Camilla. "Is this accurate?" Camilla's reply was steady. The footage was relocated to preserve discretion, not conceal wrongdoing. William did not interrupt. The king's gaze returned to the transcript excerpt. "You mustn't speak of every conversation." He read the line softly. Silence followed. It was not accusation. It was weight. Camilla's tone remained composed. Children of rank must learn restraint. William's response came quietly. Restraint should not begin with secrecy. The king folded his hands. You believe this constitutes a breach of guardianship protocol. I believe it establishes a precedent, William replied, where influence over a minor succession occurs outside accountable structure. The room absorbed that carefully. This was not a domestic disagreement. It was a philosophical divide. Hierarchy versus guardianship. The king exhaled slowly. For centuries, counsel has been offered to heirs privately. William nodded, with documentation. Another silence. The king understood what was being argued, not in anger, but in evolution. He dismissed the courtiers for a brief recess. Only the three remained. The carved doors closed. No aides, no note-takers. Only bloodline and authority. Charles spoke first. You must understand, he said gently, that the monarchy's greatest vulnerability is public fracture. William's voice did not rise, and its greatest strength is private integrity. The words hung suspended. Camilla's gaze moved between them. You would risk perception, she said to William, over nuance. I would risk perception, he replied, to protect a child's autonomy. Charles studied his son carefully. In that moment, the generational shift was visible, not rebellious, but resolute. You have always been direct, Charles said quietly. I learned the cost of indirectness, William answered. The reference was unspoken, but understood. For a moment, Charles looked not like a sovereign, but like a father aware of inherited shadows. He rose slowly. This matter will be reviewed under sovereign discretion, he declared. Pending conclusion, the temporary proximity suspension remains in effect. Camilla absorbed that with composed dignity. William inclined his head respectfully. No victory, no defeat, only process. Outside the chamber, word spread quietly. Review confirmed. That night, encrypted backups of the missing footage were examined again, this time under sovereign oversight. And what the enhanced restoration revealed was subtle, yet profound. At the 50-second mark within the 90-second segment, Camilla's voice was clearer than before. It is important you understand your position. Charlotte's voice, faint but audible. Yes, ma'am. Not everything must be shared outside these walls. The tone was not threatening. It was instructive, but it bypassed guardianship. The issue crystallized. This was not scandal. It was structural overreach. Meanwhile, in the nursery wing, Charlotte resumed her routine. Lessons, supervised play, evening reading. Her demeanor had steadied, but she remained more thoughtful. William visited her before bedtime. She looked up from her book. Are you busy again? She asked. A little, he admitted. Is it about grown-up rules? He smiled faintly. Yes. She considered that. Rules are meant to keep people safe, right? Yes. Even important people? He paused. Especially important people. She seemed satisfied with that answer. After she slept, William walked alone through a dim corridor. Not E17, but another identical in structure. The carpets muffled his steps. Portraits watched silently. He thought of his mother, Princess Diana, of how silence had once protected reputation over vulnerability, of how institutions sometimes confuse discretion with immunity. He would not repeat that pattern. The next morning, a formal conclusion was drafted under sovereign authority. It stated in measured language that while no malicious intent had been established minor guardian protocol required reinforcement. Residential proximity guidelines will be revised to ensure documented guardian presence during any unscheduled interaction with direct line minors. It was a subtle rebuke, but unmistakable. Camilla would retain title, dignity, and ceremonial function, but access boundaries would tighten. When the directive was presented privately, Camilla received it without outward protest. Evolution, she said quietly. William nodded. Accountability. Charles regarded them both. Continuity, he added. The monarchy had chosen recalibration, not rupture. But beneath that decision lay recognition. The institution could no longer rely solely on tradition to define boundaries. It must articulate them. Later that afternoon, William stood once more by the palace window. The gardens below were unchanged. Visitors still gathered beyond the gates. Cameras still flashed. To the world, nothing had happened, but internally, something vital had shifted. A future king had insisted that influence over his daughter required structure, not assumption, and the crown had listened. The recovered footage was archived under sovereign seal, not destroyed, not hidden, preserved, because lessons buried are lessons repeated. As dusk settled, the palace exhaled slowly. Routine resumed. Ceremonies continued, but within its ancient walls, a new clarity had been carved. Guardianship would not be symbolic. It would be procedural. And though no headlines would ever carry the story of those 90 seconds, their echo would shape policy long after the corridor lights dimmed. The morning light filtered to the high windows of Kensington Palace, falling in narrow slats across polished floors. Outside, London moved in its usual rhythm. Taxis weaving through traffic, tourists milling in clusters, life continuing unaware of the quiet upheaval unfolding within the palace walls. Inside, the air was different, measured, deliberate. Each movement carried significance. Every glance held meaning. The corridors, silent for hours, now hummed with protocol. Footsteps of officers moving precisely, quietly, but with purpose. Prince William remained in his private study, reviewing the finalized directive one last time. The language was formal, precise, and absolute. Temporary withdrawal of residential access for Queen Camilla, pending sovereign review. It was not personal. It was procedural. The decision rested squarely on the principle of guardianship. A royal aide entered, carrying a sealed envelope with internal instructions. No fanfare, no commentary, only process. "Is everything ready?" William asked. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," the aide replied. He nodded, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the private corridor leading to the Queen Consort's residential suite. Guards flanked discreetly, each trained to anticipate but not interfere unless commanded. Each step echoed softly on the marble floors, a rhythm of controlled authority. Camilla was informed quietly. The envelope was delivered to her private secretary, a senior aide who had served the palace for decades and understood discretion as sacred. She read the contents and replied with composed acknowledgement. There was no protest, no drama, only acceptance. Minutes later, she departed from her residential wing, escorted with dignity by a single palace officer. There was no public spectacle, no scandal. The event was contained entirely within the architecture of protocol. The palace's internal mechanisms ensured decorum while enforcing authority. As she walked, the officers ensured the corridor remained secure. Access logs were updated in real time, and security rotations were recalibrated to reflect her temporary absence. Each movement was deliberate, each action intentional. Every decision reinforced the monarchy's equilibrium. Meanwhile, William returned to Charlotte's side. She was unaware of the exact mechanics behind the morning's events, only that her environment now felt safer. She continued her lessons with her tutor, laughter and curiosity returning gradually. Her demeanor was steadier, more secure, evidence that the protective measures had immediate effect. In his study, William reviewed every layer of compliance: communications, logs, surveillance, and staff rotations. Every iota of the process was documented, leaving no room for ambiguity. Authority had been exercised, not abused. The monarchy's image remained intact, yet subtly transformed. The palace staff absorbed the shift with quiet understanding. Those accustomed to centuries of inherited hierarchy recognized the generational nuance. A son asserting authority, not for personal gain, but to safeguard the institution and its future. Later in the day, William convened a brief, confidential meeting with senior protection officers. The objective was clear: reinforce residential protocols, ensure child-guardian separation integrity, and confirm that all temporary measures complied with sovereign oversight. Every officer, from junior to senior, understood the weight of the moment. The silent authority of a future king had just reshaped internal palace operations. By evening, the palace returned to its public rhythm. Courtyards echoed with the footsteps of visitors. Gardens were meticulously maintained. Ceremonial routines continued. Everything appeared unchanged, yet internally, a precedent had been set. The monarchy had acted decisively, but discreetly, balancing authority and dignity. William stood once more at a high window overlooking the palace gardens. The shadows of the setting sun stretched across manicured lawns. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The decision was difficult, yet necessary. In the act of protecting one child, he had reaffirmed the Crown's commitment to guardianship above convenience, structure above assumption. The palace's heartbeat resumed its normal pace. Yet beneath the composed surface, the mechanisms of oversight had shifted. Protocol was no longer merely ceremonial. It had become enforceable, deliberate, and absolute. As night fell over Kensington Palace, Charlotte slept safely in her suite. Guards maintained their discreet positions, and the staff moved with disciplined precision. Stability had been preserved. The monarchy remained intact, yet the subtle recalibration of authority, the quiet assertion of guardianship, marked a new chapter in the institution's evolving legacy. The palace was quiet now, the corridors emptied of urgency. Kensington's lamps glowed softly, casting elongated shadows across the marble floors. Outside, London carried on, indifferent to the internal recalibrations of royalty. Tourists laughed, traffic hummed, and life unfolded in ordinary rhythm, oblivious to the careful architecture discretion that had governed the palace that day. Inside, Prince William lingered by the window, looking over the gardens. They were immaculate, ordered, serene, a reflection of the institution he now had to balance. Ancient tradition tempered by modern guardianship. The weight of those 90 seconds of protocols breached and then restored still pressed lightly on him. Yet in that pressure, he found clarity. Leadership, he realized, is not defined by spectacle, but by the quiet enforcement of principles when no one is watching. He thought of Charlotte, her small hand resting in his, her gaze measured yet trusting, the subtle resilience in her demeanor. In protecting her, he had not merely enforced rules. He had preserved innocence, autonomy, and dignity. That delicate equilibrium between bloodline and duty was fragile, but it was also enduring. The recovered footage, once a source of alarm, was now archived under sovereign seal. Locked, preserved, its lesson intact. Not to be hidden, not to be exploited, but to serve as a record of vigilance, and as a reminder that the corridors of power, though silent, are never neutral. He reflected on the subtle shifts this episode had created. Within palace walls, authority had been redefined. Guardianship now had formal teeth. Protocol, once abstract, had become actionable. Influence over a child of succession could no longer be assumed. It had to be accountable. The monarchy, in quiet moments, adapts, evolves, without fanfare, without headlines, yet with profound effect. William's thoughts turned to the wider picture. Tradition and modernity often collide, and institutions built on centuries of heritage are rarely comfortable with change. Yet it is precisely in these collisions that resilience is forged. By acting decisively, calmly, and within moral bounds, he had reshaped not only the immediate circumstances, but also the expectations of future stewardship. He allowed himself a faint smile, not of triumph. There was no victory here, but of understanding. True legacy is rarely visible. It is quiet. It unfolds in measured decisions, in protection of those who cannot yet wield power, in the careful balance of duty and compassion. The palace settled into night. Guard patrolled silently, their footsteps a rhythmic echo of discipline. Charlotte slept soundly, her dreams undisturbed. Camilla's presence remained formal, her title intact, but the internal boundaries were now unmistakable. The monarchy had acted decisively, yet gently. Authority had been asserted, yet preserved. And in that quiet, William recognized something enduring. Leadership is not always about commanding attention. Sometimes it is about holding space. Space for integrity, for morality, and for the subtle threads of continuity that bind a centuries-old institution together. Outside, the city lights twinkled. The palace exuded calm. The world saw stability. Inside, lessons had been learned, boundaries established, loyalties clarified. The silent battles had been fought, and their outcomes etched into policy, practice, and principle. As dawn approached, William remained at the window for a final moment, reflecting on the delicate balance he had helped maintain. Within ancient walls, the greatest victories are often invisible. The corridors may be empty, the cameras unseen, the minutes unremarked by the public. Yet the moral architecture of the crown had been quietly strengthened. And tomorrow, as history will always demand, another question of power, duty, and loyalty would arise. But for now, the palace rested in deliberate serenity, and the legacy of this moment endured beyond the lens. Because in the monarchy, the most enduring changes are not broadcast to the world. They are engraved in the invisible frameworks of guardianship, integrity, and the quiet courage to act when no one is watching.